All right, welcome everyone. My name is Alison West. I'm a senior legal advisor at ECCHR, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. Thanks for joining us today for this press briefing titled Preliminary Hearing in the Iuventa Case in Italy, Civil Rescue at Sea is Not a Crime. Before getting started, I'll quickly run through the logistics of today's event. First, for simultaneous interpretation, in Italian and English, you can change the channels using the little globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In terms of how we will proceed, I'll give a brief bit of background, followed by inputs by 3 different speakers, one after the other. I'll then open the floor up for a Q&A. Questions can be written in the chat, or you can pose them directly. To pose them directly, I ask that you please write your name and the medium that you work for in the chat. And then I would ask you to unmute yourself, but please stay muted until asked to do so. The event is being recorded, so if you would not like to be seen on the screen, please switch off your camera, and the recording will be made available to you all for your reporting immediately after the event. We're also happy to take requests for individual interviews that can also take place after the event. Before I introduce today's 3 speakers, I'd like to give just a brief bit of background on the topic that we're here today to discuss. On the 21st of May, 2022, 4 crew members of the civil search and rescue ship Iuventa, who saved the lives of thousands of people in distress in the Mediterranean Sea, will attend preliminary hearings in Trapani, Sicily, where it will be decided whether they should face charges of facilitating illegal entry of migrants to Italy. If they're found guilty at trial, they could face up to 20 years in prison. In total, there are 21 defendants who are facing charges, including 3 organizations, Médecins Sans Frontières, Save the Children, and a private shipping company. In 2014, after Italy stopped Mare Nostrum, its life-saving maritime mission in the Mediterranean, civil society organizations stepped in to fill the void, to save the lives of refugees and migrants in distress on the central Mediterranean route, which is known as one of the world's most deadly for migrants. While the Iuventa was in operation, the 4 defendants among the crew contributed to rescuing more than 14,000 people. Nevertheless, their ship was seized by Italian authorities in 2017 and investigations were opened. Despite the fact that tens of thousands of people have drowned on the central Mediterranean route, the prosecutor argues that the rescues carried out by the Iuventa crew and the others currently facing charges were not carried out in response to distress at sea, but rather that the crew cooperated with smugglers. In 2017, following the seizure of the Iuventa ship by Italian authorities and the initiation of investigations into the sea rescuers, legal documents concerning the case were leaked to the Italian press, including the full names of the crew members. This resulted in a heavy media smear campaign, surveillance by the Italian authorities, as well as threats by far right-wing movements against those who were named in the documents. Improper investigatory practices like wiretapping, including against journalists and lawyers, also came to light. The criminalization of the Iuventa crew and other sea rescuers not only contributes to the shrinking of civic space for human rights defense, but also poses far-reaching consequences for the work of civil society organizations more broadly, as Italian authorities also accuse them of profiting from their rescue work, as their success in raising visibility around the issue led to increased donations in support of their rescue efforts. This same model of raising awareness and visibility and seeking donations is also one used by countless civil society groups around the world. We at ECCHR, along with a number of other human rights organizations, see the charges as part of a larger disturbing trend to criminalize solidarity with refugees and people on the move. It cannot be reiterated enough that sea rescue is not a crime under international law, but a vital form of human rights defense. In November 2019 and January 2020, ECCHR submitted 2 complaint letters to the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, arguing that the criminal investigations and the smear campaign by Italian authorities violate the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In October 2020, the UN Special Rapporteur condemned Italy's criminalization of the sea rescuers and affirmed their rescue work as a vital contribution to human rights defense. To ensure that the preliminary hearings and any subsequent trial in Italy happens transparently and under the eyes of the public, we at ECCHR, along with Amnesty International, the European Democratic Lawyers, Giuristi Democratici, Swiss Democratic Lawyers, and the European Association of Lawyers for Democracy and World Human Rights will be on site to monitor the preliminary hearings. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. First, we have Katherine Smith, a crew member of the civil rescue ship Iuventa and a defendant in the case. She's one of the 4 Iuventa crew members who stands accused out of the 21 defendants in total. After Katherine, we'll have Nicola Canestrini, an Italian criminal defense lawyer with over 20 years of experience defending fundamental rights, who's also defending the Iuventa crew members in this case. Finally, we have Richard Brody from Arci Porco Rosso, a Palermo-based civil society collective that supports people on the move. So now I will turn it over to Katherine.
Thank you, Alison, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. Thank you also to the translators. We are 4 defendants of the Iuventa crew in this trial, and our names are Sasha, Uli, Darius, and my name is Katherine. All 4 of us have operated on the rescue ship Iuventa in the Central Mediterranean in the years 2016 and 2017. We did so in different capacities, like captains, head of missions, rescue boat drivers. And over a course of 1 year, our crews have managed to rescue more than 14,000 people in distress from already unseaworthy, but then additionally overcrowded boats in the open sea. And for having done so, we are now facing 20 years in prison, because last year in March, charges of facilitating unauthorized entry have been pressed against us. And the prosecution is basically saying that the people we rescued have not really been in distress, that there was apparently no so-called state of necessity. In the last 8 years, 22,527 people have died in the Mediterranean Sea. 22,527 people, and those are only the ones we know of. If this does not constitute a state of necessity, then what does? Sea rescue is a legal and moral obligation. We have to help and save people if we have the means to do so. Sea rescue can never be a crime. What we do consider a crime, however, is to collaborate with and to finance Libyan militias that are illegally returning people to a place where they face imprisonment, torture, rape, and death. What we also consider a crime is to condemn people to death by failure to render assistance at sea and to deny people safe and legal means of travel. We do consider a crime to arbitrarily arrest, accuse, and imprison people wrongfully. How can a crime such as facilitating unauthorized entry even be sustained while there is simply no such thing as authorized entry for people on the move? This trial against us represents a European border regime that is using violence against people on the move, against people seeking protection, that is using systemic criminalization against people on the move and those who are in solidarity with them. So we are convinced that this trial against us is not based on juridical justice, but more informed by political interests. What is probably meant as a deterrence against people on the move and sea rescues has mainly 2 effects. 1, flight routes become even longer, more risky, and essentially more deadly because of European migration policies. And second, in our case, I can confirm that we are everything but deterred from taking action against Fortress Europe. Most of us to this day remain active in different sea rescue organizations, and this trial is certainly not stopping us from doing so. So this coming Saturday, 21st of May, the preliminary hearing will start, where a judge will decide whether the case continues to the main trial or will be dismissed. And I would also like to use this occasion now to thank the organizers of this press briefing, because you have supported and stood beside us all along the way. Thank you also to the many protesters and groups all over Europe who demonstrate that we are nowhere near alone in the struggle. Also artists, church representatives, members of European Parliament are publicly standing behind us. And so all together, we demand that the charges against us and all sea rescuers are dropped, and that this madness finally comes to an end. But more importantly, we demand that Europe and its member states acknowledge the need and responsibility to start acting in accordance with international law and international human rights. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katherine. And now we will hear from Defense Attorney Nicola Canastrini.
Yes, thank you a lot. And thanks to the organizer of the press conference for their support. We are going to face the first hearing of the preliminary hearing in Trapani on next 21st of May. It's going to be the first hearing in this phase. We expect many hearings to take place, and we expect that this phase is going to last months. The core of the charges are aiding and abetting illegal immigration. Our clients have been charged for 3 sea rescue operations, which took place in September 2016 and in June 2017. Huge investigations have been carried out. We already have heard that the ship has been impounded in August 2017. The defendants were wiretapped. There were use of undercover agents. We have already learned that illegally journalists and defense attorneys have been wiretapped during their communication with defendants or other interested people. The result of the investigation are approximately 30,000 pages of case file and hundreds of raw material, hundreds of CDs containing videos and audio of wiretap communications. Not a single contact, despite the fact that mobile phones and computers have been seized and deeply analyzed, not a single contact with Libyan smugglers or Libyan numbers have been proved by the investigators. The core problem of this trial is the problem of the solidarity, meaning can solidarity really be a crime, since the prosecution and they recognizes that no commercial interest was behind the action of our defendants. We think that solidarity is not only not a crime, but it's not even a right, it's a legal duty, because our criminal justice system has a specific crime for who does not help people in distress at sea, because saving lives cannot be a crime. I have to express my gratefulness to the defendants, because they allow us criminal defense attorneys not to be passive in these crazy charges and in this ongoing criminalization of solidarity in the southern part of Italy. I've been often asked if this is a political trial, and I think that everything is political. The charges have political implications. They serve political interests. The trial has political implications and serves political interests, and is maybe misused for political interests. And the outcome will have a deep political impact. I hope that the outcome of the preliminary hearing is going to recognize that the defendants acted legally and lawfully. And that's why, what are we going to strongly underline when it will come to the hearing in Trapani. I will be, of course, available for questions later on, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicola. And now I will turn it over to Richard Bodi from Archie Porcoroso.
Thanks very much, Alison. Thank you, Katherine and Nicola. It's a real privilege to be to speak on a platform together with you. From Archie, just thanks so much for all of the work that the legal team has been doing, and obviously to the Iuventa crew for having the courage to keep going and to speak out publicly in this very political moment and politicized trial. I'm part of a cultural and political association in Sicily called Porcoroso, but we are also part of a national federation called Archie. And so I'll be speaking for Archie today. I think the first point that is important to make within the Italian context is how politicized this trial is. And the fact that it goes back to a period when there was pressure on the rescue missions, both from a governmental level, from Minniti, who was the interior minister at the time, from the courts with various public prosecutors, though not all, but politicized prosecutors making political attacks and opening investigations against the rescue ships, all of which, except for this current trial, have been pushed out of court. And it was also a time in which there were strange and obscure forces from the far right and the secret services, which were also working against the rescue missions in order to push forward with wiretappings of the missions themselves, but also of lawyers and of journalists in a very extensive way. And I think this has to be emphasized because it shows not only that the trial is a politicized trial in terms of the criminalization of migration, which has continued through the years and which continues to this day, and I'll return to that, but also an attack on democratic principles, the right to decent journalism, and for lawyers to feel that they are protected in their relationships with their clients. And I think the trial really brings out for us any of the attacks on rights and democratic liberties that we've seen in Italy over the past years, particularly honing in against anti-racist activists and people who demonstrate solidarity with migrants and migration. I think it's important also to recall how, on the one hand, this trial began with a series of investigations in 2016, and that we now find ourselves in a very different historical moment. And we hope that the principles of solidarity and internationalism that we are seeing now in terms of how Ukrainian citizens are being welcomed, how Ukrainian citizens are being helped to cross borders, even when they do not have visas and documents, because of the horrendous situation in which they find themselves, can change the political discourse around this trial, around the ships, and around migration in general, to try and open a new chapter of solidarity and internationalism, not just for Ukrainian citizens, but for everyone who is on the move. The second point I'd like to make is that this trial needs also to be put, and the criminalization of NGOs and of solidarity needs to be put in the context of the criminalization of migrants themselves. One very real example, which is strangely coming up also in these days, is that on Friday, 4 Eritrean refugees will be in the High Court in Rome, accused of, under the same law, Article 12 of the Immigration Act, for facilitating illegal immigration, because in the same years, in 2016 and 17, they helped other Eritrean citizens move from Sicily up through Italy to reach their parents, to reach their relatives, and to reach a place of safety. These 4 Eritrean citizens, refugees, have already been in prison for 2 years, and there is an appeal underway, and they will be in High Court on Friday to try and overturn that verdict, again, based on the same principles that helping someone in distress and assisting people who are on the move shouldn't be criminalized. And as the lawyer Canestrini said quite rightly, it's not even a right, it's a duty. These trials against migrants have been going on for many years, and last year we published a report showing that over 2,500 migrants have been arrested under this law following migrant landings since 2013. This law has been pushed forward by politicians, by politicized public prosecutors, and by parts of the anti-mafia directorate, attempting to look at migration as simply part of international organized crime, instead of seeing, as Katherine rightly said, that if there aren't legal, authorized, regular modes of entering Europe, then of course, all of migration becomes irregular and criminalized. This law, under which both migrant boat drivers and the Iuventa crew and many other people on land and at sea are being criminalized, which in Italy is Article 12 of the Immigration Act, but has equivalents across Europe, needs urgent reform in order to stop the criminalization of migration. It was a law that was brought in 25 years ago in very different circumstances and with a very different spirit behind the law. It's being used and instrumentalized in a way that hits people on the move and hits people demonstrating solidarity, rather than attacking and putting on trial the people who are truly profiting from the migration crisis, the border crisis, and people who commit acts of violence. Finally, I'd just like to say that we will be present on the day as Arci and Arci Sicilia. We will be outside the court, just very nearby at the port, where you can see the court on the one side, and unfortunately the rusting deck of the Iuventa on the other side of the port. We will be there, there'll be many of us there, we'll have local musicians present, and we will have interventions from different activists and politicians on the day, speaking out in defense of the Iuventa and everyone on the move.
Thanks so much, Richard. I would now like to open the floor for questions. As I stated before, please write your name and the media outlet that you're with directly in the chat. I will then call on you to unmute and pose your question directly, or of course, you also have the option to write your question in the chat, in which case I would then read it out. If possible, please also go ahead and indicate to whom your question is directed. And I'd also like to make you aware that in addition to the 3 speakers that we've heard, we also have another Iuventa crew member with us, Sasha Gurka, as well as another Italian defense attorney on behalf of the Iuventa crew, Francesca Cancellaro, as well as Elisa De Pieri from Amnesty International. So if you have questions for any of them, now is the time. Thanks. So first, I'd like to call on Paul Pichi from the National.
Good morning, Paul Pichi here from National Middle Eastern Daily Newspaper. Can I just clarify, there are 3, I think you mentioned, Mr. Canestrini, that there were 3 particular rescues that are the focus of this. Can you tell me a little bit more detail, or whoever is most suitable, can you tell me a bit more about those particular 3 rescues and why they're significant? And can you also clarify why there are only 4 people? What's the sort of significance of the 4 people for the investor that are being charged as opposed to the others that were charged? And can I just clarify? Obviously, this is just we just represent. This is the press conference for the 4 people. Is the sort of generally the defence? Are you sort of working in cooperation with the other sort of 17 defendants? And is your approach going to be the same over the preliminary hearings? Thanks.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to speak only for our 4 defendants, since I would like to let to the colleagues to define their defense strategy on their own. Of course, we are in contact, but I'm not going to assume that anything about their motivations or their defense strategy. About these 3 search and rescue operations, it is one which took place on the 10th of September 2016, and 2 which took place on the 18th of June 2017. The core is that the 4 defendants, they cooperated with Libyan smugglers, meaning that the idea behind the investigation and the charges is that they were the last chain of transport, the last but one element of the chain of transport from the migrants from Africa to Europe. So they are charged because, as you may remember, initially there were 10 crew members put under investigation. The prosecution decided to drop the charges against 6 of them. It wasn't really clear to us why those 10 or those 6 have been even put under investigation. And I think somebody should explain that clearly to them, why they have been invested. They were object of very important investigation all the 4 years, and now the charge have been dropped because it resulted that they had no responsibility whatsoever in those search and rescue operations. The remaining 4 defendants were head of missions or captains of the search and rescue operations and the Iuventa boat on these 2 dates I mentioned earlier. I hope that helps clarifying your doubts.
Thank you. Could you just give me a little bit more detail about perhaps this is one for Katherine, could you just give a little bit more detail about those days, what actually happened, how many people you rescued, and just the sort of the general circumstances of the events on those days?
Yes, of course. On the 10th of September 2016, they allegedly cooperated with Libyan smugglers in receiving 140 migrants from them and then transferred them to another rescue boat, which then brought those migrants to Italian soil. And on the 18th of June 2017, they they had the same behavior. They received, let's say it like that, the migrants, and in one occasion they are charged with the fact that they allegedly sent the boat on which the migrants crossed the Mediterranean Sea back towards Libyan coast in order to allow the smugglers to reuse the boat in other transports.
Katherine, did you want to add anything there?
No, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
And how many were rescued in those later 2 incidents?
It's 264 rescued migrants.
Okay, now we have a question from Michael Brown from Tufts, Berlin. and Site Online.
Yes, thank you. I wish to ask about the damage already done by the investigation. Let's suppose there will not be a sentence in the end that you will get out free. But according to me, damage has been done, hasn't it? Your ship has been seized and is still seized. That means what are the consequences for your organization? And are you still operating, or has it put an end to your operations?
I would answer to that one. Yes, you're absolutely right. There has been damage done significantly already. And with the confiscation of the ship to this day remains, like Richard said before, in the port of Trapani, where it is slowly rusting away. It is not operational, and it has not been, we weren't able to use it for sea rescue ever since. But over and beyond that, the criminalization of sea rescue that has increased over the last years has not only done damage to the defendants, as in us, but to the whole civil sea rescue operations, and impacting on the way ships are operating in the Central Mediterranean. And to my knowledge, there has also been, over the course of the last years, many hundred people under investigation or in legal proceedings who were engaged in sea rescue. So the sort of harassment is impacting on people's lives, and moreover, it's impacting on the safety of people on the move who to this day rely on civil sea rescue because there are no legal and safe means to travel to Europe.
May I insist on the point, Iuventa as an NGO, after the confiscation, the seizure of the ship, hasn't got a vessel anymore which is active in the Central Mediterranean?
Yes, that's correct. So the organization that owns the Iuventa is called Jugendrettet, and Jugendrettet has not been operational in the Central Mediterranean ever since the confiscation of the ship. Us as individuals remain active with other sea rescue organizations, however, not with this organization or the Iuventa.
And may I also ask about financial damage? Such an investigation costs very much to the defendants, lawyers, etc. I imagine there's quite considerable financial damage too.
Yes, absolutely. And I missed to even mention that there is considerably financial damage first to the owners of the ship, for the state of the ship it has been put in. There's considerable funds that we had to raise in order to organize everything around this trial, obviously for the legal defense and for everything connected to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks. Now we have a question from Lorenzo De Agostino from The Intercept.
Hi, my question is for Nicola Canestrini. I would like to ask you if you could give us, please, more details about the preliminary hearing, what exactly is going to happen, if you have a rough idea of the schedule, the timeline of the following hearings, how long it's going to last, who's going to be heard, and the potential outcomes. So when the preliminary hearing is over, what happens? What could potentially happen? If you have any idea regarding the timing of the decision, then I understand that the preliminary hearing happens behind closed door, so it's not going to be open to the press. So if there's going to be any transcript or recording available? And one last thing for Richard, please. You said that there's going to be some sort of event or campaigning going on the 21st. If you could please give us some more details about who's going to participate, what's going to happen. Thanks.
To my part, I maybe missed some answers. Sorry for that. There were many questions. So just very briefly, the preliminary hearing can last months, and we expect the preliminary hearing to last months. It depends on how some procedural questions are going to be solved by the judge, because of course there are procedural steps that have been taken in order to assure that everybody has received correct information about the hearing, is capable to understand the charges in order to allow him or her the effective participation to the preliminary hearing, which is a part of the trial. So if the fair trial rights are respected as the European Convention of Human Rights states. So there are going to be, I don't know, many hearings during this preliminary hearing. It's correct. Italian criminal procedure states that the hearing is going to be held in chambers, and the transcript will be decided by the judge, but easily it will be not a word by word transcript. So there will be, usually there is no recording during the preliminary hearing. That's why we are going to ask the judge to allow the publicity of the preliminary hearing, which can be done with reference to Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. We will ask the court to allow journalists and trial observators to be in the courtroom, because we believe that the hearing itself has to be considered by public opinion, and the question on the merits of the case, which I'm not going to discuss here publicly, but because I think out of respect that the courtroom is the right place to address our critics to the legal framework governing the Immigration Act, we think that the public opinion should be informed about what happened in that court, because it's going to be, of course, a very important trial for Italian and European migration policy. I missed some answers to your question. Please, if you could remind me if there was something else that you wanted to know.
Just something on potential outcome. So, like,
yes.
What are the decisions that the judge makes at the end of the preliminary hearing?
Okay, so the outcome of this stage is not guiltiness or acquittal. The judge has to check if there is enough material to justify the main trial. So that's the function of the preliminary hearing. So at the end of the hearing, the judge is going to decide if the case has to be dropped, or if there is a need of a trial with witnesses and with all the material collected during the investigation has to be repeated before the court, because in that stage the judge has full knowledge of the content of the prosecutor's case file, which, as you may know, is not the case if we go to trial. In that case, the judge has to start again in assessing evidence against or in favor of the defendants without having any knowledge of the prosecutor's case file.
So you're not hearing witnesses at this stage?
No, there is the evidence that can be produced at this stage is evidence which has been collected in written form by defense and by the prosecution, and no witness is going to be allowed at that stage.
Okay, so just to clarify finally, it's just like arguments between lawyers?
Yes, exactly. Legal arguments which may go deeper into the merits of the case, or only having they can regard procedural aspects only?
Thank you.
Thanks. And maybe just briefly before Richard, I turn it over to you to answer the question about the events on the day. I wanted to say that as Nicola mentioned, also the human rights groups that are organizing this talk have applied. We've submitted applications in order to be present in the courtroom to do trial observation. And if that happens, then we would also be writing reflective trial reports afterwards, which would be available on our website. So please check those as well. We have not heard as yet whether we will be allowed in. We may only find out on the day of, but just to flag that again, that we will be doing that. So please keep a lookout to our websites. And now, Richard, if you want to say more about what will happen on the day.
Yeah, sure. Just very briefly, we'll be there from 9 o'clock at the port next to the fire station, which, as I said, is very near the court and also but in view of the ship. And we will have performances from local musicians. There will be a small theatre performance and interventions and speeches from activists. There'll be members of Archie, Amnesty, and ASGI present, as well as members of crews from other rescue ships, including Sea-Watch and Mediterranean. We don't know exactly the timings of when the court date will finish. I'm sure Nicola will can explain that better. But if it's 5 minutes, we'll nevertheless continue after the hearing and keep going with the performances, or try and entertain people while they're waiting for the court proceedings to finish.
Thank you.
Thanks. So the next question is from Manuel Schwartz from DPA, the German press agency.
Hello, hi. I have a question for Katherine Smith. Can you elaborate a little bit on the thing you said about that you hadn't stopped your work in this field after the detention of the Iuventa? Have you been on other ships? What have you done in these years? Just a little bit more specific. And can you, let's say, compare the situation you had 5-6 years ago with the situation we have now? And maybe for Richard or Nicola, you said that all this is based on a law that was written 25 years ago. Are there signs that this law is going to be modified or changed? Is there something going on in this direction?
So your question, what have I done since, as I understood it correctly? And so after the confiscation, I remained active with different organizations, including air surveillance with Moonbird in 2018 and also 2017. There was also a time for me when I did not focus so much on the Central Mediterranean as such, but also on other borders, such as in the Aegean. And I lived in Turkey for 1.5 years, working with survivors of pushbacks on the land borders. I have become active again in the sea rescue community last year with a feminist project that does sea rescue. And yeah, so speaking for myself, this is what I've done. I know that other defendants, such as Darius, for example, regularly still is also going on rescue missions with, for example, Sea-Watch. But then there's a range of Iuventa crew members, also those that are not among the defendants, that remained active since then. And the situation, if I should compare it to back then, has significantly changed. And especially for me, who have had a break in between, it is quite considerate, because I haven't seen the development as such from close, but had this break. And yeah, everything has become obviously much more professionalized and also more difficult to actually operate and perform sea rescue. There is close to no cooperation with European authorities anymore that are fulfilling their responsibility for coordinating sea rescue in their SAR zones. So this has become a huge problem. And as we all know, there were also a time when ships were regularly blocked, where it has taken huge amounts of time where ships were not assigned a safe port when they had rescued people on board. There is basically this threat constantly accompanying us of the criminalization that may come along with anything we do, because obviously what we do is not illegal. Still, we know that anything can be constructed out of it, and this is impacting, and this is also putting pressure on individuals. I would also like to there's also another defendant here, Sasha, if you would like to add anything on that, either to the first or the second question. I don't want to be the only one of us explaining, so feel free to jump in and also answer some of that, if you like to.
No, thanks. Nothing to add from my side. Thanks for your comments and information.
Okay, but then I would say I have come to an end with my answers. I hope that answered the questions you had.
The legal question maybe for Nicola and Richard.
Yes.
This old law. Yeah.
Yeah, the law is from 1998, and we do indeed hope that this trial changes this law. There are many ways for a court to change the law, or defining the interpretation and application of the incriminating law, or even to raise a constitutional complaint to Italian Constitutional Court if some aspects of the law do not respect the Italian Constitution and the European Convention of Human Rights. Let's see what exactly the hearings are going to bring with them, but we do definitely hope that this trial is going to change the law.
Thanks, Richard. Did you have anything to add?
I just add, yeah, I agree completely that we hope that these cases can also help us push for reform in the law, or for Article 12 to be removed completely. It's a very strange piece of law where it's criminal proceedings that are outlined in the Immigration Act. I think it's also worth saying that the Italian legal system allows for the state of necessity to be employed as a defense in these cases, as is the same for the cases of migrant boat drivers and migrants who assist people on land. So while on the one hand, Article 12 has been consistently and increasingly manipulated in these political trials, the Italian law does also provide a way for effective defense to be recognized. And I suppose we also hope, and I imagine Nicola will agree with this, hope that the Italian magistracy and also the political context will push forward to allow for the state of necessity to be recognized more consistently in the courts.
Thanks. Now we have Michael Brown from TATS.
Yes, actually, I've got two questions. First off, I wanted to reconnect to Katherine Smith and to the present situation. Have you got more specific information on which boats, which NGOs are still at present active in the central Mediterranean? First. Second, you talked about the non-existing cooperation with European institutions. I wanted to ask you a specification on Italian institutions, that is above all Coast Guard. And as much do they or don't they cooperate? And that leads us to the third question about assignment of ports. You talked about the fact that sometimes for days and days ports weren't assigned. Has that significantly changed? I often read dispatches about this or that ship, geobarons and so on, waiting for quite a few days because they get a port. Thank you.
Okay, so without there's a list of organizations actually who is currently still active at sea, and I cannot guarantee that I can recall that completely. So besides Sea-Watch, there is also the project that I'm active with, Louis Michel. There is CI, there is still the Spanish organization Open Arms, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières remain active as well as Mare Jonio, Mediterranea. There is also a number of new organizations such as Rescue Ship and Rescue People. And I have probably forgotten a number of organizations. Richard, I see you thinking, maybe you can, no, okay. So there is sea rescue, there is civil sea rescue organizations still active, and actually quite a considerable amount. The cooperation with the Italian Coast Guard, as I have known it from the times when we were active, was quite good and also functional for the majority of operations, as in, just to draw the comparison, as in frequent communication, and everything we did was under the coordination of the MRCC in Rome. So every rescue started and ended with them and was coordinated by them. Nowadays, especially the Italian Coast Guard and the MRCC are, if they are answering the phone, then they are simply forwarding the call for rescue or the demand for coordinating a rescue to the Libyan so-called Coast Guard. And that is endangering not only the people on the boats, but also the rescuers on the ships, because potentially this can cause a lot of panic, dangerous situations, including shootings. So there's little responsibility that the Italians are taking over in those situations where they are actively coordinating or even transshipping people, as they have done in the past, or rescuing themselves. So this is a significant change that I can see. And the assignment of ports, I didn't want to make it sound by any means that it is ideal as it is now, because yes, we are still waiting often for days for port of safety. I think there just has been times when it was considerably worse, where boats, ships were waiting for weeks for a port of safety. So this has slightly improved, not saying that it is satisfying as it is right now.
Thanks. Did either Nicola or Richard want to answer the third part of the question? Or if not, then I would ask once again if there's any final questions. And if so, please write your name in the chat. Otherwise, we can wrap up. Okay, so we will, final question from Nikolai from the EU Observer. So he's typed the question. I will read it out loud. You had mentioned wiretapping in the past. Is this still an issue? I'm not sure who exactly that is addressed to, but to Nicola.
Okay. I need to clear what exactly do you mean with the fact that this is an issue? Yes, if you mean that if the illegal wiretapping of defense attorneys and their clients, which is a clear breach of confidentiality and the lawyer-client privilege, if this still affects the trial, yes, it does, of course. And the fact that even journalists and the priests have been wiretapped, yes, it is still an issue, because once that fundamental rights are infringed, even if the infringement is kind of discovered, the consequences are still in place, isn't it? So otherwise, fundamental rights wouldn't have been called fundamental if they weren't fundamental for fair trial and the rules that the society gave to itself in order to be democratic and respecting the rule of law.
Great, thanks so much. So I think we'll wrap up now. I just want to, sorry, there's one quick question, final question from a journalist in the chat asking whether, Katherine, you were wiretapped.
So as I understand, the bridge of the Iuventa was wiretapped. And with that, obviously, I have been among the people who were recorded there. Whether or not my personal phone or my work phone was wiretapped, I actually don't know yet. There is around 29,000 pages of case file, and I haven't managed to work through all of it yet. So I don't know.
Thanks. There's also one additional question for you, Katherine, from Katia Bianchi from the Max Planck Institute, who asks, the failure of the IMRCC to coordinate rescues and delegate to the Libyan authorities occurs only in international waters. So whether that's the case.
Yes, I was referring to international waters. Yeah, so outside the 12-mile zone of the Libyan coast or the Northern African coast, yes.
Okay, and for Nicola, one last thing. Is it possible that a ruling comes before September?
Everything's possible in court. Even if the judge decides to strike the case and to drop the case immediately on the 21st of May. So if you think it could, everything's possible, but I don't expect neither things to happen. So the judge probably will not drop the case in the 21st, and the hearing will not end before September 2022. We expect that the preliminary hearing lasts at least until the end of the year, but it could still be that the judge sends the file back to the public prosecutor in order to complete some procedural steps. Let's see, and this is one of the important decisions that the judge has to make during the preliminary hearing.
Thanks so much. Okay, I'd just like to say a final thanks to all of our speakers and a thanks to all of you journalists for attending today. As a reminder, we will be sending a recording around later today to all of the registered participants. Also, please feel free to reach out to us, any of the organizations who were at the heading as hosting this event. Please feel free to reach out to us at any point with any additional queries or questions, including if you would like to arrange an individual interview with any of the speakers or background talks on any of the specific issues. And please also continue to feel free to reach out in the coming days on the day of the trial itself as well. Thanks so much for being with us, and yeah, signing off.